Sarah's Silent English, a journey to find her voice and her ears. Sarah had always been a diligent student. From an early age, her textbooks were her best friends, and grammar rules were her comfort zone. By the time she was in her mid-20s, she had achieved a C1 level in English, according to every test score and certificate hanging proudly on her wall. She could read a complex novel, write a sophisticated essay, and identify a misplaced comma from a mile away. Her vocabulary was extensive, filled with words like ubiquitous, serendipity, and ephemeral. Yet, there was a persistent, nagging frustration that kept her from truly celebrating her achievements. Her English remained stubbornly silent in her ears and hesitant on her tongue. In the quiet solitude of her apartment, she was a master of the English language. But in the bustling cafes, during online video calls with international colleagues, or while trying to follow a fast-paced British comedy, her C1 confidence crumbled. The echo chamber of frustration. Her listening skills felt like a faulty radio. She could pick up general ideas, but specific details often blurred into an incomprehensible mumble. Accents were her arch nemesis. American English often sounded too fast, British too clipped, and Australian too Australian. She remembered a particularly embarrassing moment during an online team meeting. Her manager, a quick-speaking American, had outlined a new project. Sarah nodded, smiling, pretending to understand. Later, when a colleague asked her to summarize, she fumbled, only able to recall vague notions. "I just didn't quite catch the specifics," she admitted, her face flushing. The feeling of being lost in translation, even at C1, was deeply discouraging. Her speaking was no better. The carefully constructed sentences she formed in her head seemed to evaporate the moment she opened her mouth. Her tongue felt heavy, her words slow and unnatural. She'd search desperately for the right idiom or a more advanced synonym, only to settle for a simpler, less accurate phrase. The fear of making mistakes, of sounding unintelligent, paralyzed her. She often found herself just agreeing with others, or offering short, safe responses like, "Yes, I agree," or "That's interesting." It was a frustrating cycle. She couldn't speak because she was afraid of making mistakes, and because she didn't speak, she never improved. Her English, for all its grammatical perfection, remained an academic exercise, locked behind a wall of apprehension. The spark of change, a trip to London. The turning point came when Sarah planned a solo trip to London. It wasn't just a vacation, it was a challenge. She had to speak, she had to listen. This wasn't a test she could prepare for with flashcards and grammar exercises. This was real life. Determined, Sarah began her new approach. She understood that her problem wasn't a lack of knowledge, but a lack of active engagement and real-world exposure. Step 1. Retuning her ears, the listening revolution. Sarah started by systematically tackling her listening problem. She realized that relying solely on English movies with subtitles wasn't enough. Tip 1. Diversify your audio diet. Instead of just Hollywood blockbusters, Sarah started exploring. She downloaded podcasts from various English-speaking countries. For British accents, BBC Radio 4 for news and deep dives, Desert Island Discs for interviews. For American accents, The Daily from the New York Times for current events, This American Life for narrative storytelling. For Australian-Canadian accents, Stuff You Should Know, Canadian Hosts, Broad Topics, Case File True Crime, Australian Narrator. She didn't just listen passively. Tip 2. Active listening with a purpose. Sarah developed a routine. First, listen, gist. She'd listen to a podcast episode once, trying only to get the main idea. What was the topic? What were the speaker's general opinions? Second, listen, details. She'd listen again, this time trying to catch specific facts, arguments, and examples. Third, listen, challenge and nuance. If a section was particularly difficult, she'd rewind and listen repeatedly. She specifically focused on connected speech, how words blend together, e.g., gonna instead of going to, didja instead of did you. Weak forms, unstressed syllables that sound different, e.g., for often sounds like fur. Intonation and stress, how the speaker's voice rises and falls to convey emotion or highlight important information. She realized how much meaning could be missed just by ignoring these. Tip 3. The rewind and reflect method. Instead of getting frustrated when she missed something, Sarah developed a new habit. She would rewind just 10 to 15 seconds, listen again, and try to identify the difficult part. If it was an idiom, she'd pause, quickly look it up on her phone, and then continue. This stopped her from feeling overwhelmed and taught her patience. It's like hitting a small bump in the road, she told herself, not crashing the car. Tip 4. The idiom and phrasal verb notebook. She dedicated a small notebook specifically to idioms and phrasal verbs she heard. For each entry, she wrote, the idiom/phrasal verb, the sentence she heard it in, its meaning, a new sentence using it in her own words. This proactive approach to these tricky expressions slowly built her understanding. She started to recognize them in real time, like familiar faces in a crowd. Step 2. Finding her voice, the speaking breakthrough. Conquering listening was one battle, speaking was another. Sarah knew she had to face her fear of making mistakes head-on. Tip 5. Find a speaking partner. No judgment zone. The most impactful change was finding a language exchange partner online through an app. Her partner, a friendly student named Leo from Manchester, was learning her native language, so they had a mutual understanding of the difficulties. Initial awkwardness. Their first few calls were painful. Sarah would speak slowly, carefully, her voice barely a whisper. Leo was patient, though. Mistakes are gold. Mindset. Leo encouraged her. Your English is great, Sarah, he'd say. Don't worry about mistakes. They're how we learn. Think of them as gold coins, not broken pieces. This shifted Sarah's perspective. She started to see errors not as failures, but as opportunities for correction and growth. Tip 6. Start small, build confidence. Instead of trying to debate complex political topics immediately, Sarah and Leo started with simple, everyday conversations. What did you do today? What's your favorite food? Zrania, tell me about your city. As her confidence grew, they naturally moved to deeper discussions. Tip 7. The Active Vocabulary Challenge. From her idiom notebook, Sarah began picking 1 or 2 new idioms or phrasal verbs each day and force herself to use them in her conversation with Leo. Sometimes it felt clunky, but Leo would gently correct her or show her a more natural way to use it. This turned passive knowledge into active skill. Tip 8. Record yourself and listen back. This was perhaps the most uncomfortable tip, but also incredibly effective. Sarah started using her phone to record short monologues, 2 to 3 minutes, about her day or a random topic. Then, she'd listen back. She noticed her pronunciation errors. She heard her unnatural pauses and ums. She identified sentences that sounded grammatically correct, but weren't natural for a native speaker. This self-critique was painful, but invaluable. It showed her exactly where she needed to improve, allowing her to target specific issues. Tip 9. Speak your thoughts aloud, even to yourself. When walking, cooking, or doing chores, Sarah started narrating her thoughts in English. Okay, I'm going to make some tea now. First, boil the water. Then, find the tea bags. This might sound silly, but it trained her brain to think directly in English, bypassing the translation step that slowed her down. The London breakthrough. When Sarah finally arrived in London, a subtle shift had occurred. At Heathrow Airport, the customs officer's rapid-fire questions didn't send her into a panic. She understood most of it and managed to answer clearly, even adding a polite, "Thank you very much," with a genuine smile. Later, navigating the tube, she overheard snippets of conversations, a couple discussing their plans, a group of friends laughing. She wasn't consciously trying to understand, but the words flowed into her ears, making sense. It wasn't perfect, but the mumble had largely disappeared. Her biggest breakthrough came during a visit to the British Museum. She struck up a conversation with a friendly elderly volunteer about ancient Egyptian artifacts. She spoke with a fluency she hadn't known she possessed, asking questions, expressing opinions, and even making a small joke that the volunteer genuinely laughed at. For the first time, she wasn't just speaking English, she was communicating in English, effortlessly and joyfully. Sarah's journey was far from over. She knew language learning was a continuous process, a lifelong adventure. But she had found her voice, not just in speaking, but in hearing the world around her in English. Her C1 certificate no longer felt like a silent trophy. It was a living, breathing testament to her dedication, finally brought to life through the power of active listening and fearless conversation.